Welcome on. It is episode number 22 of KC Grid Talk. My name is Emery Lida. It's another beautiful Tuesday night here, and we are here to recap everything about the United States Pro Karting Series at the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati, as well as everything else that has gone on in the karting world over the last week or so. Again, another great episode in store, and I'm joined once again by my fantastic co-hosts. First up, Caleb Vieska. Another weekend on the mic for Caleb at the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati. How are you feeling after another weekend of the KC Summer Series?
Yeah, it was good. And it was good. And I believe probably my last weekend of the KC Summer Series. I go back to school next week, starting on Wednesday. So yeah, that was it for the summer. It flew by, and being back at MCC, always a beautiful track. So big thanks to Sean Bayliff, Michelle Bayliff, always for the hospitality. Finnegan Bayliff's going to be on later. So big thanks to all of them. And it was a good weekend. It was on our side, it was up and down. We had some issues here and there, but we got it figured out. The entire crew came together. So shout out to everybody who was a part of it. And it was good nonetheless from our side. So you were racing, so it was good to see you out there. Even though you probably weren't going as fast as we wanted you to, but who cares? It was good to see you out there on the racetrack.
Yeah, I was out there racing, did not join the KC crew for this weekend. I might as well have just been in the timing tower with how irrelevant I was to the weekend on the K side of things. But hey, I got my screen time in the Turn 1 incident, and that is what it is. So, Caleb, you were on the mic for most of the weekend. Alex Sanders Searle joins us again. Alex, you were back in the pits this weekend. A little bit of time off for you. Coming back, how were the vibes at MCC for you this weekend?
That was great. Yeah, like Caleb said, I said it perfectly, right? MCC, one of the prettiest complexes that we go to. Third national race we've done this weekend, or this year so far. This year, you also have the road tax race and a bunch of club stuff that we do there at MCC as well, especially this weekend coming up. So, always good to go back to MCC. Racing was great. We're gonna get into it, obviously. Some drama went down throughout the weekend, but that's to be expected here at a high stakes event.
Yeah, absolutely. So, both of you guys on the sideline covering the event, doing an awesome job, I must be said. Again, MCC, the first weekend that you guys were in the timing tower, how was that for you? I know, Caleb, you've been at every event so far this year on the national side of things at MCC.
I've missed one. No, yeah, you're right.
The national, on the national side.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna say like every KC event, because I think I've only missed one event this year. So
Caleb's got the best attendance of all of us. He's a real teacher's pet out here with the amount of class he goes to.
But hey, I put in a lot of work, so
he does. That's Caleb Vieska.
Nobody will outwork me when I'm playing.
This guy. No, but Caleb puts in a lot of work. Alex as well. You were in the air conditioning this weekend. How was the timing tower versus being outside? The weather wasn't really that bad at Cincinnati compared to some of the other races this year.
Yeah, no, it definitely wasn't too bad. The timing tower, obviously a great extension to the entire track, and we loved being in there. It was our first time in there. It was, I guess there was two USPKS officials in there, David Cole, Nate Dean, our media guy, Kyle Cuthbertson. But it was good being in there. We all fit in quite nicely, and it was a good weekend nonetheless, being in the AC and working out of there, seeing the racetrack from there, from like an elevated range. It was pretty cool. I liked it.
Yeah, it was nice. I want to piggyback off Caleb. We got to announce a little bit there. It's nice. Just to emphasize what Sean does for the racetrack, for the drivers, and for us as the broadcast crew is awesome. He is genuinely for the people. If you talk to Sean, he is more than willing to have a sit-down conversation with you and really he wants to continue to improve that complex. Not that it needs any improving, but he just wants to make it the best in the country. I know that's what he's striving for, and it's getting there. So, congrats to the whole Bayliff family for such an incredible venue. And yeah, it's just awesome to see that he listens to, all of the suggested improvements. And yeah, he did it for us with the timing tower this weekend.
Yeah, so we already talked about some of the suggested improvements and the improvements that we saw this weekend with the timing tower. But as we get set for setting the grid, it is one of our segments where we kind of go over the latest news in karting. But for right now, let's take a look at some of the improvements that were announced this weekend for the 2025 renovations for the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati, and it was one of the bigger news that we covered this weekend. So turn one wall being extended back 40 feet was something that we had talked about some with the safety concerns at MCC. And it's something that a lot of the grid and paddock has kind of wanted to see, whether it be for safety, whether it be for the flow and the runoff of the corner. That's one of the things that has been extended. The new grid will improve the flow from the pre-grid area. It kind of turned into a bottleneck depending on the amount of entries in a certain class. So that has been rectified with this new solution. They also will have a new vendor area for food trucks. We've kind of seen them develop the second lane of the paddock as sort of a vendor area. We've seen different food trucks and merchandise being sold there in the past, but they'll have a revamped merch area and vendor area there as well. More parking ability with the front parking lot being added, as well as a wider entrance off of US Highway 50. So that's kind of an overview of all of the changes that are going on. We're going to talk to Finn about it some later on. But again, what do you guys think of all of the additions? Gail, we'll start with you.
I've probably been here like 4 or 5 times this year. I did a club race as well that I worked earlier this year. Honestly, the improvements, and I'll throw them back up here. The turn one extended wall was something that I think was Sean asked me about it a couple of months ago, and I told him, right, you could look at the runoff we have at Newcastle, and you could probably think that's a little bit safer going into turn one or whatnot. So, in all honesty, I don't think it's a track's fault that we have so many wrecks. It's always going to be a driver thing whenever we have wrecks going into quick turns. So, but again, it's part of racing. You can't stop that. So I think giving people, I guess, a little bit room for error is also good with the turn wall extension. The new grid, I think, we did have a little bit of, I guess, traffic going into the grid throughout all the national events. So I think that's a really good addition. The vendor area, it's always cool to see vendor areas for food trucks, for merchandise, people there to have there and kind of make it like a vendor's village and make it all pop for whoever wants to go out there to the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati. And then the parking lot, the parking, we saw at Stars, it was packed. It was pretty packed at SCUSA. I think you boys were in the car with me whenever I was like, man, if I were to park sideways here, I would ruin the entire parking for everybody who's about to show up. So I think
he was considering doing it.
I was. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, dude, I should park diagonally in the middle of this entire parking lot so I can ruin the parking for everybody else. That was obviously a joke. I fixed my truck at the end of the day. But yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And then the wider entrance off of US Highway 50, I think that's also pretty cool. I've also driven in there with our personal trailer. And I know, not to brag or anything. I know, like, I can drive and swing out wide enough to get in there, but there's also wider RVs, haulers and whatnot that I have to fit in there. So I think it's also a pretty good addition. Making it a 2-lane thing for traffic also is pretty good, because I've been in a situation where there's an RV coming this way and I'm like, all right, I need to move off to the side so I'm not in their way and whatnot. So yeah, I think all the additions are pretty cool, and I think Sean's doing a great job with the place, and Greg Heeman as well, listening to the people and doing it. They want the series to continue to come back out, so big up to them who are doing everything necessary to get all the national series back next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, I'll focus more on the on-track side of things with you. Taking a look at this renovation plan that they have, you can see the extended term one. It almost extends as wide as the grass area for Newcastle Motorsports Park. And you can see they're going to tear up the grid, make a new one to the right, kind of where the TKG trailer is currently, or where it's been stationed at national events, with the vendor area further on back, and they will move their team trailer. Alex, I think you've driven this track, correct, in the past?
Yes, a couple times.
What are your thoughts on the changes to Term 1 as well as the grid area, as they kind of look to revamp that and maybe make a new grid heading into 2025?
I think it's just going to add to, the safety of it all, right? Caleb said it best. I think the wrecks that we see more often than not, I think 95% of the time is due to the drivers naturally, right? That we see in Turn 1 in particular, because we're talking about the renovations to the racetrack. What this is going to help, though, is when an incident does happen, right, it's going to push that wall back. And I think a lot of the times the drivers that maybe get slightly hurt or the go-karts that get bent up when they hit the wall, that's going to get prevented or at least largely minimized by the fact that you're adding 40 feet to that runoff area, like we see at Newcastle a lot. There's a lot of wrecks that happen down into turn one at the start of a race, but not many times drivers hit the wall, or if they do, it's a very light tap, right? Whereas here at MCC, if you go off there lap one or you go off there pretty hard and you have a little bit of side-to-side contact with the marbles that we're seeing, then with the grass, it almost accelerates you to the wall. There really isn't anything stopping you, right? So I think now that we have that addition, it's just going to increase the safety that we have in the sport, that we have in this racetrack, and it's going to create for an even better venue than we already go to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, having driven turn one for the first time this weekend, it's kind of deceptively difficult because it's more or less flat out in a K. Sometimes it might be quicker to just tap the brake a little bit, center corner, or just a slight lift depending on the track conditions. But for all intents and purposes, it turns into a flat out corner. But if you get the turn in wrong, if you turn in early, turn in late, or whatever, and you drop a wheel, that's where it gets really tricky. It's not as much the incidents where a driver stuffs it in the barriers. I mean, obviously that is going to hurt if you're heading in the barrier 45, 50 miles an hour, but it's the Nathan Dupuis incidents or the Gage Bailey incidents where you drop a wheel on exit, you spin the cart, and there is no runoff area on the outside of the track. There's no, like, the way that grass goes, if you try to correct it to stay away from the grass and you dip a wheel and spin, you're right in the flow of traffic. And if you go wide in the corner and kind of miss the corner, go off the track, then you're straight in the barrier going 50 miles an hour. And that is also unsafe. So there's really no kind of safety zone there that the current layout has. So I think that extending it wider and kind of providing more runoff areas similar to Newcastle, it's not fully going to save the Dupuis type incidents where someone spins in front of the field, but it does make the alternative where running through the grass, you have a good opportunity to lose a little bit of time by going through the grass. You're not going to go faster there, certainly, but it's a lot safer on the outside of the track, and I think it's a really good move. The other additions as well, the grid area, I think, is needed a bit of an upgrade to be able to to have more flow into the grid. So I like that change as well, and kind of moving it over. The vendor area, of course, like Caleb mentioned, I mean, it's always nice to have those vendor villages and what have you to kind of make the racetrack pop out a little bit more, have a little bit more of a lively sense to it. So I think that these are all positive changes. I think certainly looking ahead to next year, I mean, this facility year over year seems to find new ways to kind of improve itself. And I mean, we saw it with the scoring tower this year. We saw it a few years ago with the new layout. We've seen a variety of different changes, improvements to the clubhouse, what have you. I think this is another set of improvements that will continue to move MCC forward and continue it on the national schedule. Speaking of national schedules, though, another big piece of news that came in for this weekend that was announced actually on our live stream on Saturday was that the USPKS, the United States Pro Kart Series, will open the 2025 season at the Daytona International Speedway. And this, to be honest, has been kind of a little bit of a surprise to some people because traditionally Daytona has really only been utilized by WKA. We saw it at CKNA for the South Series this past year, and I think the past 2 years potentially. But for the most part, Daytona International Speedway kind of limited on the karting front. So it's a new venue. It expands the series back into Florida for the first time since, well, last year. But it's kind of another season back in Florida where this year they kind of missed that demographic. And it's a unique starting point for the series. And Caleb, I mean, when you look at this, you look at USPKS going to Daytona, what are your thoughts on the move and kind of how you see that playing out going into next year?
I honestly couldn't tell you. When I first heard about it, a lot of question marks, I guess. We know how the track was, I guess, this year at CKNA for that event. So, I mean, when paddock space is definitely there, and, I just don't know if that track is probably fit to hold a national event, in all seriousness. I know it's getting repaved, but yeah, it's just kind of surprised me for sure.
Yeah, and Alex, I mean, I know that you've driven Daytona in the past. I know that you have experience on that track. I mean, as I do as well. But what are your thoughts on kind of a different series going to Daytona, not only going to Daytona, but opening the season up in Daytona?
It's pretty cool. I think it's going to add a little bit of aura to it all, right? It's a cool city to kind of race and be a part of besides just the racetrack. Um, for those of you who have been in Daytona, there's not many better racetracks that I'd say like in terms of the feeling when you drive into the racetrack and you feel like you're in this incredibly large dome because you are. And so that part's really cool. In terms of the track, the space there to hold, a large national event, the pit space, it's there. With the repave, right, coming, and then how the racetrack races as a whole, that's going to be the biggest, I'd say, question mark heading into next year. Obviously, we have the WK events every year. We have CKNA that held it the last couple of years. But in the grand scheme of it all, they are smaller events compared to what we're going to see probably for United States Pro Kart Series. Having said that, I think CKNA is a pretty large event here, as well as the WK events every single year. It's pretty large, actually. And they host KA, right? It used to host even, the X30 used to hold shifter stuff back in the day. So now with mainly being a focused, Briggs, mini, micro, K event, the racing's been good. I think it's slightly narrow of a racetrack, but it's going to be interesting because, like you kind of mentioned, Emery, slightly, you alluded to the idea of it's a track that not many drivers actually get the chance to go to if you haven't done the CKNA event or if you haven't done WK in the past. Obviously, it goes there every single year, but usually it's kind of like the off weekend, right? Because it's last weekend of December heading into the start of Winter Series for SCUSA. And so not many drivers make that trek down there to Daytona. They still want their last weekend off before the race season starts again. So you don't really do WK. And then if you're not a Briggs driver, you don't want to, go down there middle of the year to Daytona, you don't really race it again. So I think that's going to be the cool part. It's going to race sort of like a temporary circuit where it's going to be one of those, open book sort of deals. Obviously for the pro guys, right? They may pick it up quicker. But nonetheless, I think we have a stout field at all the national levels. So I think the drivers can pick it up fast, but I think it's going to add a little bit more of a curveball to some of these guys having, it's a racetrack that we don't go to very often. So I think that's going to be cool. I think it's a smart thing for USPKS. Like you said, we lost a demographic this year in Florida. We had it in Orlando, but a year ago. But I think just being back in Florida in March, right? So we're going to have January, February, March down in Florida. I think it's going to be cool to be, at Daytona.
Again, I mean, before you go, I don't want to sound like I'm negative and whatnot. I think it's cool that we're going to Daytona. I love when we went at Charlotte. That's for Stars and CKNA. Like, that's always cool. Like, being in a speedway is always cool. But again, I don't want to sound like negative and like, no, we shouldn't go here because I think it's cool. I'll probably be there and I'll probably enjoy it. But just like, I guess the track condition this year was one thing. With the repavement, gives me a little bit more hope. But again, the track looks quite narrow and whatnot. So we'll see what we do.
Yeah, I mean, first off, Caleb, I think the biggest thing with Daytona that I would be concerned about outside of the actual track, and it's like, I think Daytona is actually a really cool, unique track for the amount of hate that it seemingly gets by certain people in the karting world. Like, the races it puts on are unique in the sense that it's probably the least draft dependent track that you're going to go to on the national circuit. It's got a blend between technical corners and kind of, I guess, more traditional corners. And as such, the track kind of,
I think it races a lot like Ocala.
I think it does race a lot like Ocala. And like, I see that as a good thing. You wouldn't want every track to be like a Daytona, but it has no problem fitting 40, 45 karts on the track. We've seen it before at the Daytona Kart Week. We've seen it handle 45 X30s in the past, upwards of 45. I think the first year I went to Daytona, there was upwards of 50 Leopards in the field there. So they can handle that. The only thing I have a little bit of a reservation about is the pit area, because it does kind of it's not so much that it doesn't have the space, but it's kind of a little bit outdated for what we see nowadays in national karting and how it's laid out. But I think ultimately Daytona is a cool place to go to. It's a cool track. I think it's going to be a really cool experience for anyone to go. And I mean, it's some of my best memories from karting have been from my years going to Kart Week back in the day when WKA was a bit bigger, and I think it was a lot of fun for me. But one other thing on this before we move on to the final setting the grid topic is the other announcements USPKS has made. They decided they were going to go to 4 events on the schedule compared to 5 this year and, in fact, the last 2 years. And along those lines, they've also announced the dates for the season. And the key point there, the first 3 dates pretty similar to what we've seen this year, but the 4th date of the season will be in August. They round the season out about a month and a half earlier than they have the last 2 years. So, I mean, you guys, you've been covering the last couple of USPKS seasons. What are your thoughts on a 4-race calendar? Do you think it's the right amount? And do you think ending the season in August is the right move, Alex?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the perfect move for them. I think 5 races in general is a lot to do on any season. Maybe on the regional side, it's okay. On the club season, obviously, it's perfectly fine. On club races, they'll do 1 a month. But on the national level, when you're already one of 3, I'd say, main national series with PKS, Stars, and SCUSA, we get what we call the midseason burnout. We've talked about it on previous episodes. And like you said, I mean, this year we're ending in September. Last year, I think around the same time, and it's late, right? Because around September time, you still have a lot of other races going on. It's around the time that Grands is happening as well, and that's usually around the time that drivers want their break. Teams, mechanics, drivers, they want their break before you go to the big stuff, right? The Super Nationals, and you don't really get that if you're ending later in the season. And so I think 4 races, they're starting in March, ending in August. It's a good time span, right? And as long as they work around with the other national series and they really all kind of gel together and hopefully give, a little bit of breaks here and there, right? So we don't have the 9 or 10 week stretch that we had for a lot of drivers to go just be on the road. And you get that burnout. And I think it's partly why we've seen, a drop in entries throughout, and we'll talk about that later on in the show. But yeah, 4 races is, I think, perfect for a national season, and the fact that we're ending in August, which is now, is great just to minimize that burnout that we've seen the past couple of years, especially this year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Caleb, any thoughts?
I think I agree with what Alex said. The only thing that I guess I'll add, for a lot of teams and for a lot of drivers, it kind of turns in with the test weekend before, the race weekend. It turns into 10 weekends total with 5 races on the schedule for any series, So I think going down to 4 is probably ideal. Definitely. So you go from either 10 with test weekends included, you go down to 8 weekends, right? So I think that's much, much better. And I think 4 is probably the happy median. 5, we're already starting to see drops in numbers already at round number 4 from what we started at the beginning of the year. So yeah, like I agree with everything that Alex said. To avoid that, summer burnout, definitely be ideal. And then ending in August, kids are going back to school. Entry is going to drop again whenever kids go back to school. So it's going to be, good, I think, for the series.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that the entries would drop, but I will say, if you look back over the last few years, the most popular dates have been early in the year, in March and April, presumably when everyone's championship hopes are still alive and the budget hasn't been used up for the year. And I think that a lot of people have said and mentioned in the past that, you start out the season, you have, say, let's call a spade, $100,000 to spend on a season, national season, and you spend $40,000 the first 3 to 4 weekends. Then suddenly you realize, oh, hey, I crashed out 2 of these 3 races. I'm not in the points. What's the point in spending $10,000 that we could spend somewhere else if there's no real championship incentive? I haven't looked particularly competitive. So I think a 5-race calendar with no drops, like it's been the last year, has been kind of a situation where you're going to see some of that burnout. You're going to see some of the guys not show up to these races like Dowsman or to MCC once they realize, hey, I don't really have a realistic chance at the championship. But yeah, I think going to 4 races, it's what USPKS started with. It's what they've kind of always settled on. It seems like they try a couple of years to go to 3 or to 5, and they always end up back at 4. I think that's the right move, especially considering the landscape of the national series that we see with 3 national series really competing for dates at this point. I think if it was just one series, you could see an 8-race calendar or 10-race calendar, or 5 with 2 race days. But as it is, making it 4 races, I think, is the right call. So that's on the USPKS side. One last quick bit of setting the grid before we get on to our next guest that I know a lot of the comments have been very, very interested in seeing in Finnegan Bayliff. He'll be coming up next. But one guy that also has a couple K national wins on the season, unfortunately, going to miss a good amount of time with a broken hand. Alan Isambard, third heat on Saturday in the K senior race, suffered a broken hand. Wishing Alan the best of luck. Unfortunately, I kind of got a firsthand view of what happened in that incident. But for Alan, I mean, it's been difficult really for him since the start of the year, where he won 2 straight KA races, found himself in the championship lead at one point in stars. Kayla was pointing out to me, where's the Aiden Rudolph graphic as well. Aiden Rudolph suffered an injury way earlier in the weekend, was out from, I think, the last practice on Thursday onwards, if I'm not mistaken.
No, he was out from Saturday morning, I believe, with a muscle spasm.
Or Friday, excuse me.
Saturday morning.
It was after Friday, not after Thursday.
It was Saturday morning during the warm-up session. Suffered a muscle spasm, and that put him out for the rest of the weekend.
Got you. My apologies.
He qualified at the warm-up, and that was it.
Yeah, I got you. But yeah, so Alan Isambard suffered a broken hand. Will be out indefinitely for the moment. Aiden Rudolph, I believe, with the muscle spasm, out for the weekend. Should be back in the seat in the near future, though. Best of wishes for the recovery of both of those guys, and unfortunate for both of them is it looked like, at least in Alan's case, he had the pace to run all the way at the front this weekend and contend for a win. In Aiden's case, certainly as well, had some good pace throughout the day on Friday up until qualifying. So best wishes for those two guys, but this has been setting the grid. We've gone through kind of the main storylines of news for the weekend, and now we get to be joined by a special guest. We're going to have Finnegan Bayliff joining us, very popular among our viewers. But in the meantime, we're going to go to a quick commercial break first before we come back, and we'll have our segment with Finn.
Brandon, why are there all these charges for just over $200 from Acceleration Kart Racing's website?
That's because AKR gives you free shipping on orders of $200 or more within the continental US.
Okay, but I thought you were just getting a pair of gloves. That's what, $70?
But if I'm getting a new pair of gloves, I might as well get a new pair of shoes to match. And then on top of that, I'll get a neck brace, because with the shipping, it's basically free.
Yeah, I do not think the math checks out on that.
Everything you need, all in one place and shipped to your door for free for orders of $200 or more. Exclusions apply. Spend responsibly. Shop AKR.com.
Welcome back to KC Grid Talk, powered by ShopAKR.com. Everyone wanted Finnegan Bayliff. We had Carter Thompson. We had Ben Rush in the comments. And hey, we made this the best podcast ever. So, Finn, I mean, it was a difficult weekend for you at the track in terms of on-track results. But, I mean, as a whole, another weekend at MCC. How are we doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing good. How are you guys?
We're pretty solid. We've been talking about it. We've already got Caleb talking about injuries and feeling like he thought that he was a bit too harsh on the Daytona side of things. We've got Alex wearing the Ty Fisher merch. So I'd say we're doing pretty good.
That's good.
Yeah. So
how are you, Finn? How actually are you doing? I saw you Sunday after the race. You looked, a little bit. You looked fine, but you were chasing after your dog or in your backyard, aka the paddock. What happened there?
Yeah, she gets out sometimes, and I got to go chase her down. She doesn't like to listen at all, so that's about how that went. But I'm doing good. Excited to be on the show.
Yeah, rate your weekend. I mean, I know it was like a rough one in the feature race, but I think it was solid up to that point. I know the pace was like maybe a little bit off in that feature race. With the bottlenecking that was happening while the defending, I think you still would have had a shot in that race. So, I mean, how would you kind of rate that race and the weekend as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the ending wasn't great, but we had the speed all weekend. In the final there, I went from 10th to top 3 in like the first few laps, and we were running good, but just had a reed actually break, and that's what happened with the motor. it just shut it off and couldn't keep going.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk about that final bit. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you had a little bit of a scare there in turn number 2 on the opening lap where it looked like you made kind of wheel-to-wheel contact. And it kind of looked like your side pod was giving you some trouble there during the race. So how was it to kind of manage that and still ultimately move forward up until the engine started to give way?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't even know the side pod was off until I got into the pits. But I got up in the air and I actually hit my butt on the motor, and it was like hurting the first half of that race. And then I had to sit there on the barrier with a pain. But yeah, I didn't even notice it until I pulled in.
That's crazy. But I mean, this weekend, I would say was kind of the first down weekend that you've had at MCC this year. I mean, you finished on the podium at Stars. You obviously won race number 1 at Scusa. I mean, in general, this year, I would say has been a step forward in form for you since last year. I mean, how would you characterize your season to this point and what have been some of the strongest moments that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, getting the win the first round at Scusa Orlando was awesome. It set the year great for me. I was originally going to run X30, but that just didn't go to plan, and we ended up moving back to K, and it's been a solid year all year. I'd have been wishing for it last year. I know I didn't get that championship, but if it were last year, I would have been wishing to be even close to this spot.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. Finn, I guess I'll take you back. I think your dad, whenever he was on our show, he kind of joked around by it. Because I remember we looked back to, I guess, the start of the year around Orlando, and we were like joking around, like, dude, you're 21, you should probably retire. Like, it's over, you're washed, whatever. And then that same weekend, I remember you crossed the line in first and you win, obviously. And I was like, by a pretty big margin. And I was like, dude, like, maybe you got one more year in you, like maybe you got one more year in you. And then you come back and you do what you did and, put yourself in a spot for a Scusa championship. Obviously didn't go your way, but I guess my question is, how's it been nonetheless being here after I guess so long of so many close calls? Because I think that race in Orlando was probably your first national senior win, if I'm not mistaken, Finn.
Yeah, I think that was at least the biggest national win I've had. But yeah, to be there, it was just great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk about that then. Your win in Orlando, it sets you up nicely for the Scusa Championship. You looked like, honestly, up until the last round, it was really between you and Overbeck. Overbeck came out on top. On the star side of things, you walk into the third or into the fourth round of the championship with, 2 solid weekends, one that wasn't so good in Charlotte, and then obviously USPKS. Between the DNF here, the DNF at Trackhouse, and then a good weekend in Dowsman, but then a so-so weekend in Texas, maybe not as great. I mean, as you look forward to the rest of the season, I mean, what are your goals now with Scusa wrapped up, USPKS where it is, and then also Stars with one more race?
Yeah, I think my goals are really just to get as many wins as I can and get as many podiums as I can. I mean, that's everyone's goal. So it's going to be tough. Obviously, everybody knows all these tracks, and it's just, what else can you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned the win at Orlando, the win at Cincinnati. This season, like we mentioned, it's kind of been your kind of breakout year on the senior side of things. Was there ever a moment where it kind of like clicked for you, so to speak, where it kind of you realize like, hey, like I've got this year? Because I know in the past, I mean, it's not like you haven't shown pace. You won the 2022 Stars race at Cincinnati. You've been on the podium a few times over the last few years, but has there been kind of a difference that you would say from this year to previous years that's kind of set you apart from where you had been?
Yeah, it's really just mentality. I've just been trying to keep a level head all year and not get frustrated. Last year I had a couple of DQs from getting frustrated and just being like reckless and just like just not thinking. This year I just went around thinking more and trying to actually win instead of being frustrated.
Yeah,
Finn, for a driver, sorry about that, Emery. For a driver that lives at the racetrack, MCC, and has done a lot of races there this year, I mean, what's the progression to that racetrack been like? Because I mean, I know we talk about the grip levels and just the new rubber that's been being put down from SCUSA to USPKS, right? We had 4 major events there with SCUSA, PKS, Stars, Rotax. What was it like from the SCUSA event to the PKS event in terms of the grip levels?
Yeah, the SCUSA weekend, it started off, I mean, not super grippy, kind of where I knew how to drive the track and didn't have to change up too much. But as we kept having races and stuff, I just had to keep changing the line. The track just got way faster. I mean, we weren't even touching near these lap times last year. It's just been crazy. The track has held up actually a lot better than I thought it would. And yeah, it's just been super grippy up until now.
Yeah, and Finn, I really think one of the biggest misconceptions that a lot of people have, you guys obviously live on site at the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati, you and Gavin, and obviously your dad Sean, but a lot of people really think that you're driving every day and getting in the seat every day, but that's not the case. I've been there during the week and I've seen the hard work that you and Gavin put in, day out to keep customers happy and work on their go-karts and work on team go-karts and have a 206 ready for whatever customer coming in that day. So what's that kind of been like, taking the reins more of the team? Because I know there's some weekends as well where, if we're at MCC, your dad's not even involved with the team that week, and it's you and Jared and Gavin as well who are kind of running the team as well. So what's kind of that all been like, I guess, running the team, dealing with customers while trying to race at the same time?
Yeah, it's been crazy, and I do all my own mechanical work too.
Yeah,
it's just been crazy. We've had like moments where we forget stuff and just mess up, but everyone on the team's great, so it doesn't bother them too much. They know how much work we put in, and we're just doing our best to keep it all organized. I know that my brother isn't happy with the way our shop work looks and stuff, just because it's so unorganized to him. But other than that, I think we've been doing a great job.
And that's also one of the craziest things. I feel like Gavin has probably, to be in the sport of karting and to be in a parts thing, you have to have a little bit of OCD as well. And seeing Gavin, organizing all the shop, and when you walk into your shop, it's pretty clean. The trailer, all the cabinets are labeled, and everything has a spot. And if it's out of place, then Gavin, isn't probably the happiest, where it was like, no, that wasn't there, that didn't go there, or whatever. So you kind of leave that up to Gavin, or you get in there and kind of try to, I guess, help him out a bit.
He likes it his own way, but I do try to help as much as I can. Not thinking on the same brainwave sometimes kind of makes that difficult. We get into arguments and all that. But we work together pretty well.
That's good.
Yeah, and for you guys this year, it's been a busy last couple of months. Really starting with SCUSA, you've had, I think, only 2 or 3 weekends where MCC hasn't been hosting a race between the club series, between Stars, Rotax, SCUSA, USPKS, and then not only that, but you guys also have your own traveling band as well, going to Newcastle for the last round of SCUSA and to USPKS at Dowsman as well. So, what kind of toll is the summer taking on you guys to have, I would say, more races at the track than ever before, and also fighting for a championship in your own right and going to these national races outside of your home race?
Yeah, it's been stressful. It's not been as bad as it sounds. It's people's dream to do this, and it's my dream to do this, and it's the life I want to live, so I have to deal with it, and sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's not, so it's great.
Yeah, and back onto the on-track side of things on your end, we've raced KA the last few years. You've seen some really strong fields. You've seen some fields maybe not quite as strong. This year, MCC bringing in over 250 entries, I believe, 2 Stars. It was a over 200 entry turnout as well for SCUSA. This weekend at USPKS, not quite as many. I don't think we quite got to 200, and it was also the least packed K field, the least amount of entries since 2019. How different was it kind of racing this weekend with fewer karts, and is it something that you kind of expected going into the weekends?
Yeah, it's always going to be the same amount of difficulty. We still had plenty of fast guys in the group. I didn't particularly expect it to be as low as it was, but I think that had to do with school and all that coming in, and nobody's in the, or more people are out of the championship than in it. And I just think that it's going to slow down at some point. So it just happened to be here.
Yeah, it's that was one of the things that me and Emery were kind of talking about coming into the weekend, right? That we're like you said. Sorry about that. I just dropped the remote here, but like you said, it's been an up and down year for you guys, nonetheless. But I want to talk a little bit about the renovations as well. Your dad was on the show, and I mean, you obviously live with him. He's the first one up in the mornings. He's up about at 4:30 in the morning and works until probably like midnight. And when did he come up with these renovations? And I know there's a funny story behind this because it all happened so quickly, but when did he actually come up with this idea for the renovation?
I think he actually came up with it Saturday night or Saturday morning at like 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning. He gets up every morning around then because he can't sleep and he's always just thinking. But I still don't even really know about the renovations. I haven't looked too much into it because it happened so fast. But yeah, I think he did it Saturday morning at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Saturday morning, and for those of you at home, it was published the next day during our broadcast, I think at the end of the broadcast on Sunday evening. So that's how quickly, a guy like Sean Bayliff works and how his mind kind of functions as well. And what's that like? I know your dad's like a little bit hands off with you guys and isn't, I guess, there with the team so much, and you guys do your own thing. But what's kind of that like? Do you guys still argue like you guys used to when you guys were kids, or what's it kind of like working with a guy like Sean?
It's crazy. Everything's always changing, so it's hard to stay organized. And he's always got something on his mind, and he might not like it the way we do it or the way I do it specifically because I'm more relaxed than him and Gavin. But yeah, it can be tough sometimes. But other than that, I mean, it's really easy working with the both of them.
So is it safe to say Sean Bayliff has a favorite child here, and it seems to be Gavin?
I don't know. I think they think on more of the same brainwaves, so maybe.
That's fair enough.
Oh man, no. So we just saw Sean in the comments say that Greg came to him with the same idea Saturday night.
Greg Heeman.
Greg Heeman, again, partner of MCC, really crucial to what they've done. And I mean, it's awesome to see the amount of upgrades that you guys have brought to the facility. We were mentioning in the first segment, but again, in the same sense that we said that it kind of moves year over year kind of quickly in the amount of upgrades that you guys have brought, to have it happen, idea happens on Saturday, announced on Sunday, that's pretty sick. And as Tori Daniels Racing says, MCC is a beautiful facility. But to end off my questions for you, Finn, I was about to ask this when we first got into the whole discussion of your season so far and the improvements, but we got to talk about some of those unsportsmanlike DQs from last year. I mean, what lessons have you learned, and specifically about keeping the hands on the wheel?
Yeah, I got in a lot of trouble with my parents for those couple unsportsmanlike conducts, but I learned that I can only control my own outcome, not everyone else's.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also, I mean, you're one of the veterans of the field as well, right? And talking to your dad, he kind of made a good point to us whenever he came on the show that, 21, a lot of people think that's too old, but at 21, you are winning races. Mick Gabriel's in the higher 20s. He's winning races. Alan as well, he's in his 20s and he's winning races. So you think, well, I mean, I kind of know the answer to this, but the older and older that you get, the more experience that you get. And I think the more that we see the KA field kind of play out, it seems like the older guys are also starting to kind of take the upper hand in the class as well. So it's also like, I think of maturity and how is it when like a young guy like this weekend, Javier Herrera was up there with you guys and he's 14 years old racing in senior. So what's that kind of like racing with young guys like that? When a guy like yourself, Mick Gabriel, Alan Isambard, AJ Myers as well, race with like some of the younger guys?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it can be a little frustrating when you see somebody that young out there with you after you've put in all this work, and it can be frustrating, but it's good to see as well. You can see where it kind of ended up for him, just having the inexperience.
Yeah.
But I think the more experience you have, obviously it's going to be great. I think the older you are, I mean, you're going to have more experience. And then, like, I think 21 isn't really old.
It's not.
Like,
it's
yeah.
not. I'm obviously pulling.
Yeah, no, I know, but I think like all these race car drivers are in their 30s and like, but the age does keep getting lower, so it's hard to deal with that sometimes.
And you're also in like the consulting range as well for kind of like y'all's team, and you coach a lot as well at the track. So what do you tell, I guess, drivers who, I guess, come to you guys and like, I have a plan of going into cars and doing this year, and they're probably the age of 13, 14, and they want to go to cars and move away from karting? What do you guys kind of tell drivers like that to continue to develop them? Because you guys are obviously, you know, I think if you put yourself or Gavin in a car, I think you guys would do an all right job as well.
Yeah, I think you should always stay in karting as long as you're like in the racing career. It's going to keep your mind sharp, and like your reaction times are going to be a lot quicker because everything happens so much faster in a go-kart that it just like keeps that mentality good. And the racing's a lot closer in a go-kart as well because you're not worried about hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're worried about a couple thousands, and you're just able to race better in a go-kart. So I think you should always stay in go-karts.
Yeah, very good point.
Definitely. And I mean, again, you kind of talk about the TKG, or Caleb kind of brought up the TKG experience that you have in sort of being a mentor, a coach, kind of working on the consulting end with that. But as a team, I mean, I talked to Sean about this a few weeks ago. When you've seen the growth that you guys have had really since you started karting and over the last decade or so, I mean, what has it been like for you to go from kind of being more of a regional, a club organization at the early years of Trinity to now? I mean, you look at the last few years, you could kind of list off an A-list name of guys that you guys have brought into race, and certainly guys like Lucas Palacio, Evan Gilter, even going back, Arias Dukmejian, you had Joe Turnerton at one point as well, I believe. I mean, you've had a lot of guys, and then you've also developed a lot of drivers as well. How much satisfaction does that give to you to see kind of the fruits of you guys' labor pay off?
Yeah, it's great. We put a lot of effort into these kids, and I think that it's awesome to see, especially when I'm personally coaching one of them and they do good even in a go-kart or move to cars and do good in those. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and one thing before you get there, Emery, you try to coach me for y'all's MCC rental kart race that you guys had, and whatever coaching you gave me and whatever braking suggestions you gave me, they didn't work. So I hope you do better with all the other guys, because we spun out, I think myself and Trevor spun out like a total of 6 times trying to figure out y'all's track, and I definitely didn't work out. And it definitely wasn't your coaching. It was definitely us, but I'll blame it on you.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah. Do you have any advice on how to not be on 2 wheels for 80% of the weekends in a K?
Oh man, it's even tough for me. I think that leaning into the corner obviously can help that, or just getting off the brakes earlier. That's the best way I can tell you to do that.
Yeah, drive better. That's basically it's basically the advice. But no, I mean, this weekend, again, for you guys, you kind of had some of the downs on your end, and obviously Josh Bergman had a DNF in the final. Gavin, maybe not quite the weekend he would have won it. But on the flip side, a huge win for Rocco Simone. Liam Vitor with the podium as well. And, I mean, you guys had really some good pace throughout. So as a team, how would you assess the weekend as a whole?
Yeah, as a team, I think it was a solid weekend. We had Enzo and Brandon up front too. Brandon obviously had not a very good end of the weekend either, with I think his motor blowing up as well. But it was a great weekend. It's been a great year for our team as well. So it's just a solid weekend.
What do you rate Gavin's performance in X30 this weekend?
I rate him a little rusty.
It was funny because I think I was standing on the fence like one of these two guys, and I was like, I think Gavin's driving the shifter line right now, because you see how much he was like attacking the corners at the start of the weekend. And talking to him as well, he was like, yeah, I'm still driving it like I'm driving a shifter, because I haven't driven like a single speed around here in so long. So fair play to Gavin, though. A top 10 for qualifying was pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, when he was actually in the fight for it, he was still doing good. So I rate it pretty good.
Hey, shout out Gavin! Shout out Gavin!
What do you think was the better performance between Gavin this weekend and you in the X30 down in Miami?
He obviously had a better weekend being at the home track and knowing it. So
Yeah.
I think he had a little bit of an advantage there.
Fair play, but I mean, well, again, you were good in OKN earlier this year. Like, I know your dad kind of always tells you that you should probably move up to OKN or move up to X30, and like you tried it this year at the start and then went back to the K stuff. But what are you looking at for next year? We're expecting to see you back in the seat, so you looking to get back in an OKN for the full year or even an X30?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure yet. I would like to finish this year before I even get to thinking about that.
True.
So I'm debating on X30 and OKN. I think those are probably the top classes that I would go to.
I got you. Well, one last thing from me, and then I'll see if Alex has any more questions. But I mean, last year you turned 21, big birthday year. This year, I believe it's right after Stars Trackhouse turning 22. You got any special plans for that?
I'm not sure. Probably hanging out with you guys or something.
Oh man.
Yeah.
We'll see, Alex. Do you got anything else, Alex?
I can't hear this guy.
Hey.
No.
He needs his mic on. Well, even if he has questions,
is that better?
Yeah, you're on now.
Yes.
Dude, it was like just slightly loose. I was actually wondering why.
Oh, he's off again.
It's gone again.
Yeah, this cord's loose. I'm gonna fix this during the break. I was trying to butt in a couple of times and like y'all couldn't hear me and I was wondering why. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. No, I'm out, but I think Finn's probably right about the whole hanging out with us thing for his 22nd. So yeah, that'd be fun.
Hey, last year was a fun time at the Airbnb or NXT Y'all's place. So 22 should be a good year as well for, this year for Finn. So
some might say it'd be through the roof.
Hey, your dad saying Michelle's. I just got that. But Sean saying Michelle's margaritas. So that'll be a fun time. But yeah, 22 is gonna be through the roof. So I guess an early happy birthday for you, and thank you for coming on. I know it's been great. It's always good when we see you, and you've proved a lot of people wrong this year. You've let all your naysayers know that you still got it. You definitely still got it, dude.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for having me on the show.
No, for sure.
Thank you for coming on, Finn.
Thank you.
Awesome to have you. And again, that's Finn Bayliff. Awesome year for him. 2 national wins to his name so far this season. He'll look to extend that for the rest of the national calendar. You're running IME Grands, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think yeah. So IME Grands, you've got Stars, Night Fight, you've got USPKS Newcastle, and then Super Nats. Am I missing anything else?
I don't think so. I think that's all I've got.
Got you. So, few more national races for Finn. A few more trips to North Carolina. Hopefully a few more races with success. But again, Finnegan Bayliff, thank you for joining the show. It's been awesome. I know the fan club, Carter Thompson, Ben Rush, and everyone else had a lot of fun listening to you. And hey, I mean, we even got Sean to comment a couple of times. So this has been a good segment, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh man. All right.
Thank you, Finn.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Finn. And we will head on now to our final segment to recap the past weekend at USPKS Cincinnati, Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati. A lot of fireworks, a lot of racing to discuss. We'll talk about it here in a moment. But first, another word from shopakr.com.
So you finally want to get behind the wheel, huh?
Yeah, I've been shooting for 3 years and I've never got to drive.
Well, you're going to need some more gear than just your helmet. Why don't you go to shopakr.com. They got their inventory online and they'll ship it the same day if you order before 5:30 p.m. Eastern.
They got shoes?
Yep.
Gloves?
Yep.
Rip protectors?
Got those too.
Can they make me go fast?
No.
Here at Acceleration Kart Racing, we've got everything you need to get on track. What happens next? Well, that's on you. Check us out online at shopakr.com.
Welcome back to episode number 22. We're going back in time here to episode number 1, but no, episode number 22 of KC Grid Talk. No David Land on this one. Instead, we have Caleb Bieska, powered by shopakr.com. That's the same as it was all the way back in January. And once again, we're here to talk about some good racing. We've got a few more things to cover before we head into the rest of the show. But first, a really exciting X30 senior final. We saw Ryan Norberg walk away with the victory, Pauly Massimino in second, and Alessandro De Tullio rounding out your podium. Really an eventful race. We'll get into some of the fireworks, but before we do that, I mean, Alex, what are your thoughts on Norberg kind of getting himself back into contention of USPKS and the championship race as a whole now?
Okay, first of all, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
I got you this time.
Okay, perfect. All right, I got the cord is loose. I don't know why. All right. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack throughout the weekend, I think, for all classes, but in the X30 main especially. You said it, right? Norberg back in contention. He entered this weekend 500 plus back. And we thought, okay, this is Garrison's to lose. Garrison actually mathematically had a chance to go and clinch it this weekend. He didn't. And we'll get into more of his weekend later on. But for Ryan, I think this is scary stuff for the rest of the field. We go to a track that he has shown dominance in. He did it at the Pro Tour. That's how he won the championship, right? Obviously, Hayden had a bit of misfortune there in that main. But nonetheless, you go into any championship weekend with a guy like Ryan Norberg, who's going for his 10th national championship now, in contention. That's scary. I think right now the favorite's still Garrison, but only about 200 back now is the Tullio. And Alessandro De Tullio, as much as maybe that feature race was a bit up and down, a lot more down for him, he escaped the chaos for a top 3 finish. And I think anytime you could do that, that is how you win championships. You win championships by being consistent, not by winning just the main events. And we talked about that heading into the Pro Tour finale for the shifter events, right? Where it's AJ versus Morgado. Obviously, it didn't go the way of AJ, but I think the reason why a lot of us thought that AJ had the shot is not because, we didn't think he had the speed. Mateus wasn't very strong usually in the heat races, really good in the finals. And AJ is good in the heat races and pretty good in the finals. And so that's why Garrison's up there. That's why DeTullio's up there. I think that's why Ryan, even with the misfortune, still has a chance. Now, the racing as a whole, the first half of the race, I'd say, I think objectively, I don't want to say the word boring, but it was a little uneventful. And it all started off first lap, right? We lost one of our main contenders from the chance of a win. DeTullio got pushed away wide, and he fell back to the mid pack. And so that's one of our main contenders that was able to actually go and attack Norberg. He did it in heat 3. He beat him in heat number 3. And then obviously, a couple laps into the race, we lost Brandon Carr to an engine failure. There's another guy that our pole sitter out of the race. And so from there, that put Pauly 2 seconds back, separated the field. Basically, as long as Ryan didn't have an engine issue, he was going to win the race. Pauly was stuck in second. And then from third on back, that's where the chaos started, right? I mean, we saw Harley kind of defend a lot of the race from Garrison, from the likes of Spec, his own teammate DeTullio, and about 5 other drivers that were involved in that train for a while. We'll get into more of that later, but I think that's where it all kicked off, and I think arguably the racing was a little bit over the line. I wouldn't even say arguably. It was over the line racing. There's a reason why I believe there were 9 drivers out of the 17 that were really in the mix of things who got penalties. A lot of them had multiple penalties. And so, yeah, we'll get into more of that later, but that's kind of my thoughts on that X30 main.
Yeah, and real quickly, before I go to Caleb's thoughts, before we get into the real spicy stuff, I mean, Alex, I told you on the grid on Friday, I was like, hey, we're going to see Norberg win by 18 seconds. And it wasn't quite that big of a runaway, but
it was 8.
I saw it was 8.
It was close enough. He won. I told Pauly this, and Pauly, I mean, obviously Pauly wasn't pushing that hard. I mean, he looked back and saw the lead that he had. There's no reason to go out there and push. You're guaranteed a P2. And Ryan actually told us afterwards that he was watching the race from the lead. That's how big of a lead he had. Pauly was coming out of the dog leg, turn 15, and Ryan was going into turn number 2. And I know that for a fact because I was standing on turn 1, and I just wanted to see the lead that he had. And at his best, it was dog leg, entering the start-finish line for Pauly, turn 2 for Ryan Norberg.
Well, I would venture that when Norberg came around turn 14 and 15, it's like the last corner complex, he could probably see.
He told us. He said a couple times he missed 14 because he was watching the race.
Yeah, because you can see through 14, you can see the battle coming up through the turn 11. So, yeah, he saw a lot of the
and
shenanigans.
You can do it out of 2. You can actually I think it's actually too far ahead to watch him into 1. But especially coming out of 4, you can see him come out of 3, I think.
or out of 4, you can see them coming down the main straightaway too. It's
with how
yeah,
big of a
I
lead
know.
you had, yeah.
Yeah, I was watching the KA race from the other end because I was 40 seconds off the lead.
No,
So
you were so far in the lead. That's what it was.
That's right. If you add an extra lap to my count, I was actually way
It
in front.
depends on how you look
So
at it. All right.
I was playing
Glass half full.
I was playing the Ryan Norberg simulator. But anyways,
That
Caleb,
glass was half empty. Proceed.
Hey, well, bro. Anyways, Caleb.
Well, bro.
So
Yeah.
before we get into the like real discussion on kind of the spicy topics, the Harley Keeble, Austin Garrison, Louis Speck, et cetera, what did you think of both Ryan Norberg and Paulie Massimino being able to get such a big gap? And how would you characterize the weekend in terms of the pace that each driver had?
Well, going into the weekend, Ryan was obviously the guy to beat. I think whenever my plane landed on Thursday afternoon, I get to the track, first thing I hear walking around the paddock is Ryan's the guy to beat. This guy is blazing fast. He is really quick, and it was no surprise because of how quick he was at SCUSA a while ago, him and teammate Kai Hunter. But you know, I knew Ryan was going to be fast at the start of the weekend, and he had a lot of pace. And in that main event, he's starting on the inside. You know, he got to the lead, didn't look back, and pushed the first half of the race. And then the second half, it was just, you know, maintaining your equipment, because we saw what happened to him when he was flat out pushing for 25 laps at SCUSA. His motor blew. You know, he had motor issues. So, you know, spoke to him and I was like, hey, like, I know you can probably say that, you know, you're at the end of the day, Sunday, Alex was with me and I was like, hey, I know that you know, you probably say that you don't think about these things, but I know that was going through your head. Exactly. And he was like, hell yeah. Like I was exactly thinking about that. Like I was thinking about my motor because of what happened here last time. And I was like, rightfully so. So he managed it well and, you know, had a lot of pace. And I think he was by far the guy to beat. There was a couple other guys in the main event who had really good pace. Brandon Carr arguably should have been up there, and unfortunately his motor let go. Alessandro Tullio was wicked fast, and so was Luis Speck, and they obviously got held up behind, you know, the blocking. And Paulie was silently working his way up, and he got through the traffic, and you know, he was pushing, and then he kind of said it himself. He was like, yeah, there was no shot I was going to close my 4-second gap down to Ryan. So I just maintained my gap as well, because I look back and nobody's around us. So I'm just going to continue to drive and just keep it on the black stuff. And that's exactly what he did. But I think towards the end of the race, obviously Paulie didn't have the same pace as maybe ADT or Louis Speck, but that's obviously because he was probably managing a little bit. But yeah, I think Paulie had really good pace throughout the weekend. And I think those two guys, you know, deserve to be 1 and 2 this weekend because they played it out smart.
Absolutely. So I've been alluding to some of the fireworks that happened in this race and some of the more kind of questionable things, particularly from third on back. So we went ahead and clipped a good amount of the race and of the racing that we saw from this past weekend. And really, this all centers around the discussion between Austin Garrison and Harley Keeble, because both of them had their run-ins together. It's been publicized both by us and as well throughout the paddock over the last few days. And really, this is kind of the main storyline heading out of the weekend, but there's a lot to cover about this race before we kind of get into our actual opinions. So this is the first incident I want to show. This is actually from the heat race on
giving the bumper to
sorry, I'm going to replay this.
It's the third final heat.
From the third
Harley
heat.
Keeble giving the bumper to his countryman. Brandon Carr goes way wide, and that's one of the biggest things that surprised me so far, Xander.
Yeah, and so you can hear Caleb on the mic there. You know at that point that Keeble comes into the corner, and let's face it, from pretty much any angle that we look at, kind of boots him out of the way. Like this is
kind of.
I wouldn't say kind of, but yeah.
This is pretty egregious stuff, and I mean this kind of sets the tone for what we looked at in the final. And I mean, Alex, I know you kind of have more, you've heard more of the backstory, you know, kind of about this incident, but after this point on Saturday, I mean, what did you think of the incident? And do you think that was acceptable racing?
Well, there's a couple things. Your last question there, acceptable racing? No, it is not acceptable to do this. in any form of racing, right? I mean, this is not bumper cars at the end of the day. And like you said, no matter what angle you attack it, I mean, you can see Carr's head move, and he got moved out of the way. Having said that, I think this was brewing for a while, right? I know Carr kind of got into Keeble earlier on the weekend. Keeble wasn't very happy with it, so he felt like something had to be done about it. And so he moved Carr out of the way, cost him a lot of spots. At the end of the day, Brandon Carr actually didn't finish the heat race because he got into Austin Garrison. You could argue maybe the Keeble thing doesn't happen. He doesn't get into Garrison. Either way, Brandon Carr also made his own silly mistake, I'd say, in getting into Garrison. He actually apologized to Austin that night, and so they made up, and they were fine. Now, I think the biggest issue that stemmed from all of that was there wasn't a penalty given to Keeble for that incident. And so Keeble actually maintained his top 5 finish in that race, having moved Brandon Carr, which I think, again, there's so much that happens throughout a race weekend, so many things that happen during a singular race. And so this is nothing against officiating, any of that. I think not getting a penalty, though, now it sets the tone for the future race. And if you're a guy like Brandon Carr, if you're a guy like Garrison, if you're in that class, you look at that and say, no penalty, okay, gloves are off. Let's go out there and let's do battle, right? Now I think this created some of the tension that we saw in that future race.
I think I completely agree with what you said, but yeah, you really said it yourself, and the fact that there was no penalty for that move, you know, I really think it's almost as probably unacceptable as the move itself. You know, we can't have that in a race weekend where there's a move being made and there's no penalty for it, you know, because then we never learn from it. And I think if we did have a penalty during that, then what happened in the main event doesn't even happen as well. So those are just things to look out for. And, you know, it's just stuff like that. Like I've made that move before. And funny enough, I've moved somebody out of the way, David Cole, you know, out of the way, and I didn't get a penalty for it. Funny, and like, but I'm being serious. So that was at CKNA. I was obviously
it was posted too.
Mine was posted. Mine was probably even worse. But because, in all seriousness, because officials don't say anything about it during that race, then you go into the next one thinking, all right, you know what? I'm gonna do it again to somebody else. And the rest of the field gets that message, and it goes on and on and on as the weekend progresses. And sadly, I think the fact that there was a no call for that is, like I said, as unacceptable as the move.
Yeah, I mean, really, there's no way to say that it's rational without understanding the context behind it, and without understanding, like, if you look at that incident in a vacuum, you'd say, yeah, Keeble just booted him way out of the way, unacceptable. Now, understanding it from some of the things that happened earlier in the weekend, Harley felt like he was slighted from some earlier contact by Carr. That makes it to where you at least can understand where, like, what Keeble's mindset was. But in a vacuum, looking at the racing condition, that is objectively a penalty. I feel like the USPKS officials seeing the video would likely agree with that take, considering what they would penalize throughout the weekend. I mean, hey, ultimately, this is not bashing the USPKS officials. They do a great job. They handed out a bunch of penalties this weekend. I think a lot of them were good to go. I think a lot of them were legitimate. But ultimately, when you have hundreds of laps during a weekend, you're bound to miss a couple. I think that one was pretty clear. And considering it was ultimately, one could say, a retaliation attempt of sorts, it probably needed to be nipped in the bud heading into the final, because this is where it gets a little bit more crazy. So this is lap 2 of the race here for Harley Keeble. You can see him leading his train of go-karts, led by Louis Speck. And again, I'll play it back
and I guess
here,
the pace early this year, but in
from
this race at their home
the
track,
get-go. And you can
definitely
see
has a lot of spec now, putting
Louis
the pressure
Speck to the
on
inside
Harley
here.
Keeble,
He tries
who's
to
gonna defend
move,
for third.
and
Everybody
just
else
watch
further
the
back,
movement that
looking to make
Keeble
moves.
makes
Those
here.
are on the outside. Bumper to bumper, everybody's getting stacked and packed here by Harley Keeble.
Yeah, Keeble is backing them all up right now. Louis Speck was setting him up for a nice over-under on that short shoot, and Keeble knew it. The TB kart looks pretty good early, but he's got to get by Keeble if he wants any shot at the top runners. Keeble with a block right there, a reaction move and a second move down at turn number 1. Harley Keeble is dancing the line right now, and Austin Garrison says, all right, Luis, you can't get by him. I'll go and take a shot at him.
All right, so I want to hear from you guys first. I went with Alex on the last one. Caleb, I mean, what was your take on that clip, both when you watched it live and now watching it back on replay?
So I think Xander said it best. Definitely dancing the line. I know in Europe, moves like this are acceptable over there. And that's just not the case over here. It's not acceptable for us because we know what can happen whenever you swerve on a straightaway. It can end really badly for both parties. And I don't really think that, looking over your shoulder and then reacting to somebody going on your inside, like here, moving over and reacting and then looking over again and then going back to the outside. I don't think that's fair. I know it's acceptable in Europe or whatnot, but that's not how it works here. And USPKS tied down on that last year. A lot of drivers, I can go back to Stephen Miller swerving Oliver Weldon, where Stephen Miller got DQ'd from the race after winning. And that win was given to Oliver Weldon in the end. And a couple of more incidents as well, right? Paulie got DQ'd earlier this year for whether a swerving penalty and whatever. But regardless of the fact, I don't think, looking over your shoulder and reacting to somebody going on your inside is acceptable at all, because contact can be made really easily if somebody's already on your side. We saw earlier this year as well with whether it was Josh Bergman as well, got a penalty for that at Stars and whatnot, and issues of sort. But one of the biggest differences is I think at USPKS, it's all very, there's officials in every corner and we're all human. We don't see everything. I don't see everything on a race weekend. So I think that's where you kind of need the video side to come into. And unfortunately, USPKS doesn't have that yet. So I think that's the last little thing that USPKS is missing from the officiating side, to get video out there in some key corners or corners where you can see the entire track. So you can catch stuff like Harley's incident with Brandon. So you can catch Harley either moving on the straightaway. So I would say about that move, again, back to your point, Emery, I don't think looking over your shoulder and closing the door on someone after they're already going for a move is acceptable. And I don't think it should be.
Yeah. And to be fair to USPKS on this one, I believe we don't get the official event notes on when a penalty was called and what it was for, but Harley did receive a 5-position penalty for blocking in the main event. Now, you could argue that was maybe too lenient, too severe, what have you, but based off of reviewing the rest of the final, I feel like this is the most likely incident that they would have given him a blocking penalty for. And Alex, I mean, again, you saw this live. You've been around the sport a while. You've kind of been in the situation that Harley's been, where you have a whole pack behind you. I mean, do you see this as fair blocking, or do you think that this was a step over the line?
To do what Harley did there, and he's done this in the past, and I don't single him out. We see this a lot from many drivers who see this kind of racing and think it's okay, or come over from the European side of things where it is okay. To do what he did, though, you have to have a compliant rival, right? Like, if Louis Speck doesn't back out of that, we probably get contact. But Speck was at least, aware enough to be like, okay, he looks over his shoulder, he's going to turn down, I have to back out of this one. Let me set up the over-under. But then his over-under was taken away by Keeble just saying, okay, I'll take back the racing line. That's where it becomes not okay. In some forms of racing, I've been in it before, I've asked the officials, and that's okay. In this series, and in most forms of karting, it is not okay to do that, right? You have made your bed, now you got to lay in it, right? You go to the bottom of the racetrack, you're stuck there. You are not allowed. Sometimes you are given, the leniency of, you go over, you can come even halfway back just to create a little bit more of a disturbance for the crossover. You can never, one, react to a move, and then when the guy says, okay, you went that way, I'm going to go this way, you now cross over in front of his line again. That's where it becomes touchy. I think it's a little bit less than black and white. I think it, like you said, looking at the race as a whole, I think that's the most obvious reasoning for the blocking penalty that I can see USPKS gave it to Harley for. And for sure, I think it was on merit. I think it was an on merit penalty, maybe even a little bit lenient, just because at some point we have to put our foot down completely on the whole blocking / swerving ordeal that we've seen throughout the year. And again, this is not me singling out Harley, because we seemingly talk about this, I think, and you boys can attest to this, every weekend at the racetrack when we're driving back to the Airbnb or the hotel. We say, did you guys see that block? Did you guys see that, swerve? It's almost every weekend. And I think at some point we have to put our foot down, and maybe the penalties should be more severe, and it may seem unfair to the drivers, but at some point this is the only way to kind of cure this right now.
Yeah, no, for sure. And looking back at it again, Emery, if you can replay it here, there was no contact made. And again, Luis Speck races in Europe. He's probably used to stuff like this. So Luis probably thinks this is okay as well. And he thinks it's fair racing. But, for some other guys, like we've seen what's happened here before. We saw what happened at Homestead earlier this year with Ramos and Dalton, whenever Ramos kind of reacted to a move that Dalton was making. And both of them came together, and that was a pretty nasty crash as well. So, a lot can happen throughout this, but it didn't. You have two, I guess, compliant drivers who are like racing each other cleanly. But again, it's just we know what can happen out of that. We've seen the result from that happen before, and it's not a good one ever.
Yeah, well, so I think the first thing to establish here is, by letter of the law, this is not really swerving, but the issue that causes this to be a penalty, and it's one I fully agree with, is at this point in the straightaway, Keeble has gone all the way to the bottom at first. He comes back up, and he reestablishes his line down at the bottom of the braking zone. So on this straight alone, that's 3 moves. You're only allowed 1. And really, the 1 move has a little bit of legroom, but when someone is on your bumper like that, you really don't get that. Swerving would be if someone had established position to his inside, which was not quite the case. So doesn't get elevated to a swerve where the minimum penalty is 10 positions, but still, that was blocking. Down the main straight again this time. This one, you see, he looks back, sees Speck is not to his outside, then looks to his inside. See, Speck is starting his move to the inside. This is not quite swerving, I would say, but it is a reactionary block, which in itself should be a penalty. He then looks back to his right, sees Speck going to his right, and moves back to the right. That is, again, 2, almost 3 moves in one straightaway, which, again, that's against the rules. Obvious penalty on both fronts. You can see cost Speck multiple positions because he had established himself in a legal racing position. It's not like he had tried to stop Harley. He tried to kind of race by the letter of the law. Harley basically double moves and really creates himself a situation that was always going to be a penalty. Having said that, in my opinion, that incident is by no means unique to Harley Keeble. We've seen drivers in the past make multiple moves. I've been in races where I feel like the other driver has moved to the bottom, seen someone not coming that way, look back, and then move back to the right. So for me, this was, yes, it was on the line. I think there's an argument to be made that Keeble's blocking in this race was a result of some of the frustrations built up from early in the weekends. But either way, I think good on USPKS for sort of establishing that it was a penalty. It was a 5-place penalty that ultimately was never going to get overturned. The second part of this that kind of is worth noting from this final is contact with Austin Garrison. I believe this is the first set of contact here. So you can see Garrison makes the pass coming onto the main straightaway through turn 14. Clean pass, finally gets by Keeble. And you can see here coming into turn 1, I'll let the incident play for itself, and I will let the commentary take over.
Going to work together as Garrison goes low to defend into 1. Keeble with an over-under, not able to get down to the inside, but he'll move him out of the way. DeTulio and Keeble shoving the line through in turn 2, and Garrison to the wayside. Andre DeTulio, he's already now down an 80-point loss from 3rd to 7th. There it is. Oh, off the racetrack and into the dirt for Harley Keeble. Meanwhile, as this pack battles 15 seconds behind the leader, Speck with an over-under. Keeble takes Garrison off the racetrack. Big time points implications.
All right, so lots to unpack here, boys. Let's start out with the first incident with Keeble and Garrison coming down into turn number 2. Alex, I'll let you start with your interpretation of this initial incident.
Yeah, watching it live, and I think we all have the same opinion, right? Okay, Keeble got into him, penalty. And then you got to watch it again and again. You look at kind of what started it all. I want to clarify a few things. So you mentioned it, right? Garrison and Keeble were trading spots for a while in this race, but they were both slower than the 3 behind them of Speck, DeTulio, Levy. So that's why this all, unraveled for everybody. Garrison, like you said, finally gets around Keeble with 7 to go, cleanly. He blocks for a corner and a half and gets moved at the racetrack. So this leads to the frustration from Garrison in the later incidents that we saw. But in this one, you actually can see in the brake zone of turn 2, Keeble had some help. DeTullio did get into his bumper on the brake zone. Now, do I think that Keeble could have maybe done a little bit more to avoid hitting Garrison? Yes. I think it's unfair to fully say, okay, 100% that's Keeble's fault. I think there's assistance on this. I think it's more on Keeble than everybody else. But there was assistance in the initial part of the brake zone, as far as I'm concerned. And this is kind of what Keeble also relayed as well. That there was assistance in the brake zone, and he was moved kind of into Garrison, couldn't go anywhere. I think he could have helped himself a little bit, but he got into him. And that's just for that first one alone. That's kind of my viewpoint on it. I think the second incident that we saw, it's really tough to tell from that angle if Garrison actually got into him on the entrance to 11 on the back straightaway. Keeble, the trajectory his go-kart was going, he was off the racetrack. Having said that, Garrison got a penalty because he could have avoided Keeble, and I think out of frustration for just the driving that we saw from Keeble with the Brandon Carr incident, and Garrison at that point had felt like Keeble just moved him off the racetrack in 2. So the second chance he got, instead of avoiding Keeble, he quite clearly just runs him out of road and gets a penalty for it. And he told me after the race, listen, I deserve the penalty. I for sure, hands up, I deserve the penalty for this one. I ran Keeble out of road fair and square, right? So now, and I hate to say this, right? It's 1-1, right? You did what you wanted to do. It's 1-1 for each driver. Let's go back, shake hands, be fair. And then that third incident, we unfortunately didn't get it on camera, but it's pretty clear to see exactly what happened here. Last lap, now Keeble's mindset is, you got me. I need to do you back one more time. And then just completely drives himself and Garrison off the road. And so that's the one that really, I think, frustrated Austin, right? It was already a frustrating race, and this has nothing to do with him being the points leader. We'd be talking about this if this was for 15th, right? If this was the sort of driving that we saw. But the frustration comes from, listen, it was 1-1, right? You got me, I got you, right? Our races are both kind of ruined here. And then the last one where Keeble just ruined his race and his own race, that's the one where it means 100% on Harley Keeble. And that's the sort of driving that we don't want to see, especially in a pro class, when all the young stars and even the drivers in the pro series are looking up to you. And that's kind of the driving that you see. It's not ideal.
Yeah, and Caleb, I mean, walk me through your thought process on all 3 incidents.
I really don't want to sit here and kind of point fingers at, you started it, you this, you that, you here, or whatever, right? Because the fact of the matter, we're all adults. Those guys are adults or very grown teenagers, 17 for Harley, and Austin's just about 25. We're getting there. We're all getting paid to do this. We're all in the sport, and we're all working.
They're pros.
You're a pro driver. Firstly. Secondly, I really think the biggest issue that I have with the entire thing, firstly, I really don't think that, maybe some of this stuff doesn't happen and the aggression doesn't start to come out if, and again, I want to make this very clear before I go on and say what I have in my head. Harley Keeble was a great kid, stand-up kid off the racetrack, and I have nothing but the best to say about him. He's always cool with us, and we always hang out with him off the racetrack. But
100%.
The biggest issue that I have with this entire, race is that we were blocking for 3rd place. Fourth. We were blocking for 4th place at the start of the race. We were about 2-3 laps in, and we're blocking for 4th place when there's a complete other race going on ahead of us. Ryan Norberg's getting away with Paulie Massimino and Brandon Carr. Those 3 drivers were long gone. Okay, yeah, some moves, maybe a move maybe lost you guys 2 seconds, but the blocking lost that entire pack 5 seconds to the top 3 drivers. And that's the biggest problem that I have, because these guys are running away and we're fighting we're fighting for the race win for 4th on back. That's where I think, aggression starts to come out from everybody in that field. And, I could argue that, maybe Harley didn't think he had the pace to get up there and maybe fight up there. But we have 25 laps to race. It's almost half an hour of race time, and we're letting the race run away from us here. That's really what kind of frustrates me the most. And if I was in that situation, that would frustrate me, because there's 25 laps in a race and we're blocking in lap number 4, and we have the pushback bumpers, and, it's probably hard to move somebody because that stuff being said. But I think it all stems out from that start of the race when lap 4, we're blocking for P4, and then it all kind of unfolds to the way it did or whatnot. And again, there was, I would even argue there was frustration from Ale as well at the start. He started on the front row. He gets, he was wide in turn number 2. So he's seeing Ryan, championship rival Austin Garrison or whatnot, running away. I'm going to start making moves too. I'm going to start going on the inside, going late on my brakes. And, cause I want to go, I want to get there. I want to make moves here. I need to get up there. I can't let Ryan get away or whatnot. And again, for Brandon Carr as well, whenever he tried to make the move on Austin Garrison early in the weekend, that's desperation. We get a little bit desperate whenever, as racing drivers, we fall back in the field and you want to go up and make moves. It's desperate driving, I would say. So if you want my honest opinion about the 3 incidents, I think as pro drivers who get, I'm not a pro driver, but as those guys who get paid for a living to do this, and they get, they represent a team, they represent a brand, and everybody, I'm not singling out Harley Keeble here. I'm signaling out Austin Garrison for Speed Concepts Racing, Brandon Carr, and Harley Keeble and whatnot, all drivers involved in incidents this weekend. Everybody who's had incidents this year. We need to do better for our sport to represent the sport. And we need to do better as pro drivers to represent the series and whatnot. You heard from, and I really want to compare this to the NASCAR event that happened this weekend with Austin Dillon, Joey Logano, and Denny Hamlin. I think Denny Hamlin said it the best. This incident and the no call made our sport look like a joke. And as blatant as that sounds, I think that relates a little bit to what happened in our race this weekend.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of what you just said, because I think maybe it's blunt, but we have to be that way. I want to first start right. We are not signaling out Harley Keeble. He is a friend of the show. He's been on the show. I like the kid. I see him all the time at Homestead. Super awesome, rising star. And he's going to go far in this sport. 100%. He has the talent to do so. We say this because we actually like the kid. We want him to grow, right? Having said that, I think as a whole, drivers need to learn to be passed. And let me explain what I'm going to say here. Like you said, we are blocking for 4th at the start of the race, lap 2. Lap 2 is when it started. That unraveled the whole race for everybody from 4th down to last. That was it. It basically said, Ryan, here's the keys. You can go win the race, right? Now, at that moment, it was still Brandon Carr and Paulie in there, but then Carr's engine blew. And when that happened, now that battle for 4th became the battle for 3rd. Now, at PKS, top 5 is the podium, but still, top 3, right? And so I think that also really kind of lit the fire in everybody's eyes. Like, oh my God, now if you're 6th, you're 5th, let's go out there and race for 3rd rather than maybe work together and whatnot. So that it ended the race for a lot of those guys. Drivers need to learn to be passed. It is okay if you don't have the equipment underneath you on lap 2 to let 1 or 2 guys go and follow behind them and let your piece come back to you. I've seen Ryan do it a bunch of times. I've seen Garrison, I've seen Turney do it. I've seen so many of the experienced drivers go out there and let the race come to them rather than trying to create your own destiny, right? And what ended up happening is I think Harley felt like he was behind the 8 ball a little bit. He didn't have the pace that the guys behind him had. And so he kind of was like, you know what? If I can't go out there and get the win, you guys can't either. And I think if he would have just fallen back into 5th or 6th at the start of the race, he had pace, whether he wants to admit it or not. Because I know I spoke to him and he was seemingly frustrated throughout the weekend of he didn't have the pace to go out there and fully win the race, which maybe that's the case. I think Ryan had everybody covered by a 10th or so. Even though Carr got the pole, I think the RPG missed a setup and they found it in the heat races, and we could tell that Ryan had a little bit more in the bag for that feature race. But it's okay to finish 2nd, right? That's how you win championships. That is how you win championships. It's not by winning the feature races. It's by finishing good in every event in a 5-race championship with 0 drops. Ryan has a DNF, right? Like Harley is in that championship fight. After this weekend, he's not, but he was in it. And so I think
Ryan's got 2 DNFs too.
Yeah.
2 DNFs, and I think he's one of the favorites to go out there and win the thing at Newcastle. Because Ryan said, you know what, I have 2 DNFs, but I'm going to make sure every other event I am really strong, and I'm going to get the best result possible. Even in that third heat race when Tullio beat him, Ryan knows that every point matters. If you didn't see Ryan make a desperation move in a heat race, he'll take a second. You can take a second place, right? And so when we're blocking for 4th in a feature race, causing the whole field to bottleneck, ultimately after penalties, Harley finished 16th. He's not the only one that lost a bunch of spots to penalties, right? Tullio actually got a penalty. It got overturned. Austin got a penalty, right? He got a pretty rough result in that feature race. So again, just we're giving away points here. But the inner MS boys are fast. I think if Harley just slots the line behind his teammate, maybe I think himself, Garrison, Speck, Tullio walk away with it. But instead, you made it a bigger race than it should have been for 4th, and that's what created this frustration. Like Caleb said, the issue is when you block so much, everyone's mad at you. And so it's going to create frustration. It's going to add red mist to this whole thing. From lap 2 to lap 18, when it all kicked off, it was the same battle. The only difference is on lap 2, you're 2 seconds back from Norberg. On lap 18, you're 15 seconds back from Norberg. And it has nothing to do with they were that much slower than Ryan. It's because they were white lining the whole time. It's okay to give up a spot on the opening couple of laps to let your car come back to you and then win it at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think with Harley Keeble, right, he's ran this line a number of times. We saw last year in the 2023 race, he was on the edge.
But that was for the win.
And that was for the win. It was on the right side of the edge. He blocked efficiently. He probably would not have won that race had he not been so aggressive white lining. It's an approach that you can understand where his head is at. But to your point, Alex, ultimately, you have to think of a big picture, right? If you're Harley Keeble and you know that in a warm-up session or in a practice or whatever, you've been done wrong, it hurts you a lot less to go sort it out in a practice session, talk to the driver out, get it over with, than it does to risk a penalty in a heat race that's going to throw you back 3 positions, right? Even if you're Austin Garrison, right? And again, Austin in his interview that he said after the race said that he ultimately never loses his cool or whatever. But you're in a championship that you have a comfortable lead. There's no reason to risk losing more than 3 spots for a penalty by ultimately kind of needlessly creating contact. Keeble was going off the track either way. He was going to lose multiple spots. As much as Austin, I feel like, wasn't really in the wrong in the aggregate of the whole incident, he kind of poked the hornet's nest in a sense there. And when you're running for a championship, that's not something you can afford to do. In Harley's case, again, lap 2, lap 3 of the race, you don't have pace at that point. You have a 40-lap sample of the weekend at that point where you know in competitive sessions, almost every time you've been quicker than the guys that you're around. You were quicker than Lee Speck for the most part. You were quicker than Josh Oates, who was able to get right behind him early on in the final. You were even quicker, arguably, than Paulie throughout the weekends. But by losing 5-6 seconds on blocking, it kind of takes you out of contention to win. And even if you never get that pace back, the risk that you take off of multiple moves, off of kind of doing that can throw away a race, because ultimately Keeble was never going to finish worse than about 6th or 7th on pure pace or off a track position. Even before penalties, he was going to end up 8th. By kind of introducing more carts into the battle, introducing more kind of people into the fight, it brings more guys into it. It kind of lowers your worst possible result, which when you have a field of guys that are not happy with the way you're driving, it's naturally going to end up that way. And it's not a Harley Keeble thing. Like I mentioned, I think Harley in this case kind of lost his composure a little bit. I think it's fair to say. I think the incident with Austin on the last lap was a pretty rough example. The incident with Carr in heat number 3 and the blocking, none of that was good. It's not a Harley Keeble incident. It's something that Keeble was guilty of. It's something that we've seen other people guilty of as well. There was 10 total penalties, I believe, in the feature race off of avoidable contact or blocking. in a field where 4 of the 20 drivers basically had no wheel-to-wheel contact or combat the entire race. To have that many penalties is indicative of the whole field kind of treating this a little bit too loose, in my opinion. I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, the way that Keeble and Garrison's incident went down on the last lap. I mean, the perfect example of this, honestly, if you look at the way that the field was spread out, by the end of the race here, this is a battle for third. You can see the Keeble and Garrison incident here. When we cut to Norberg, right here, this is 15 seconds up the road, right? And it's not just Keeble and Garrison that are guilty of this. If you look at this image here, that we come into the corner, Tullio got a penalty. Speck got 1 penalty during the weekend. We saw Carter McMurray get a penalty. Aiden Levy got disqualified from a heat race. Garrison and Keeble got penalties in the final. Austin Olds, I think, got a penalty at some point as well. Then if you pan the camera further back, Carter McMurray, like I said, 5-position penalty for avoidable contact. Santi Fernandez got a penalty. All of these drivers got penalties. It is not just Harley Keeble and Austin Garrison. And ultimately, the guy up front, the guy that last year we saw in this exact race fall back to 16th, didn't get a penalty. Was able to get through cleanly. He's had, not that Norberg hasn't had his incidents over the years, not that Pauly hasn't had his incidents over the years, but in these sorts of races, cool heads ultimately prevail. Harley Keeble might not have won the race or finished in the top 3 if he had just raced it out and not gone for the moves that he did, but we wouldn't be having this long of a conversation if he had kind of made a little bit of a more conservative approach. But again, they're pro drivers, but still, there's something to be learned from all of this. And one other thing that I wanted to bring up before the end of the show that I think is really a valuable experience, and in some ways maybe not the best precedent, but at the same time it was a cool race to watch, was KA Jr. And this was the scenes from this final. This was basically an all-out bloodbath between Enzo Vidmontier and Sebastian Garzón and about 18 other
laps
cars
from the end of the race.
Yeah. And we're seeing really, really good racing at the front of the field. But again, this only happened because they had been white lining for 10 laps before this. And you can see, again, I'm going to get you guys' opinion on this. We'll let the rest of the race play through, but you can just see how long that train got and how much Enzo and Sebastian were both blocking. I mean, look at how long Peyton Westcott at one point was in the grass 13 seconds off the race lead, and she ends up all the way back in this pack by the end of the race, even after having contact coming out of the turn 7 hairpin. So
Golseth as well.
Yeah.
Nate
Golseth as well, yeah.
Nate was in the wall backwards in this corner right here.
Yeah.
And he was in this group in the end of the race.
Yeah, it was insane. And to their credit, there really was not a whole lot of incidents outside of those two that were kind of early on, irrespective of this sort of battling. So the KA juniors kept it clean, a lot more clean, it must be said, than the KA seniors did in a similar type of race in Dowsman earlier in the year. But this is the type of racing, yes, it's on the line. Yes, there's a lot of white lining, but it shows it's possible to race these types of races cleanly, you know? And I mean, I watched this and I said, we need to find a way to kind of eliminate this much white lining in a race. It's not, I would say it's kind of unsustainable to see clean racing like that over and over and over again. But to their credit, to the KA Junior guys, you see the Warsaw guys celebrating a really nice win for Sebastian Garzón. That was clean racing. Yeah. And I mean, Alex, I know you had a lot to say about that race, but
yeah,
what were your thoughts on it?
We talked about this before the show. Considering the chaos or what it looked like on screen, it was actually one of the cleaner KA Junior races that you're going to see. I mean, were there the incidents like Golseth with Westcott, Truchot, and a bunch of other drivers?
There was a red flag during that race as well.
Yeah, but so I think the red flag is actually what created this, right? Because before the red flag, Vidmontier had a 1.5 second lead. Now, do I think that lead would have diminished over the course of that race? Yes, as long as the drivers in second work together. It's a KA race with some long straightaways around this racetrack. I think they would have caught him. I don't think Vidmontier actually was the fast driver in that race, and that's why he was blocking so often. So yeah, after the red flag is really when this happened. From lap 11 to lap 25, you go back and watch that KA Junior race. It was amazing for us. Maybe not the greatest racing in the world. Probably frustrating if you're in the driver's seat and you're like 8th because you're just stuck there. Until lap 23. It was Sebastian Garzone and Enzo Vidmontienne the entire race, first and second, flip-flopping, because it's impossible. If you're in third and the two guys in front of you are constantly one guy blocking, one guy setting up the over-under or trying to go around the outside, you can't do anything. And then lap 23, Vidmontienne goes off the racetrack trying to hold the outside in 13, but got the marbles. That really imploded that whole group. But I want to say, one of the cleanest junior races you're going to see. Was it over the edge in white lining? Yes. Like, should we be white lining for 14 laps straight? Probably not. And I think there were a couple times where if I'm Vidmontienne and I look back and watch that race, I think it was self-induced, right? There was a couple times where, and we've seen Vidmontienne do an amazing job of this all year long, of causing a chaos and then pulling away. And he actually did it before the red flag. That's why you saw the frustration when it came out, and obviously the red flag had to come out because the likes of Gage Bailey and Marco Romero were involved.
It was Gage Bailey and Peyton Fan, unfortunately.
That was the one.
But before we even get into that, I want to send well wishes to Gage Bailey, who actually did suffer a leg injury, and for Peyton Fan as well. I know those two drivers were involved, so well wishes to Gage, and I know Peyton was all right, but again, well wishes to them. And it's part of racing, and we know it happens.
And to Marco Romero, I mean, I know.
And like that, Marco Romero as well.
We saw him.
Who also had injuries.
It was it was a T3 to T7 fracture, I think, on his back.
Yeah.
So it's not what we want. Obviously, he's going to sideline him for a while. But for Gage Bailey, Peyton Fan, I mean, all drivers involved this weekend. Best wishes. Good point there, Caleb, as well. So, please, we hope to see you guys back at the racetrack soon for Gage Bailey with that leg injury. But right before the red flag comes out, we saw Vidmontienne frustrated, right? As a driver, you don't know what happened on the racetrack. So you have a 1.6 second lead. You think you won the race, basically, and then it's going to condense the field. So from there, Enzo was like, oh, well, now I have to block. And from the green flag until the checkered flag, it was a white line fest. But Enzo's done a good job of that all year long of causing chaos. I think there was 2 times that I could point out. I don't remember the exact laps, but there was 2 times in this race after the red flag where Enzo actually created just enough chaos to where the top 4 pulled away, and if he doesn't defend for first, I think it's a 4-car breakaway, and then they could battle towards the end. Now, in Enzo's point of view, he's like, listen, I've done this all year long. This is how I win races. Fair point, right? Now, hindsight, you probably should have just not blocked for the top 4 spots, but nonetheless, my point is, even though this race looked like a disaster, and like Xander said on the broadcast, right? This is not normal. This doesn't usually happen. Usually it's maybe 10 karts max, not 20 plus, right? Not very often can you literally back it into the barriers and be in the lead pack. And if there was 5 more laps, I think Golseth would have had a chance at the top 5 or top 10. So, and even Peyton Westcott as well. So, it was clean. I mean, there was respect shown, and I think part of what we see on the racetrack from the junior drivers is they look up to the senior guys, right? Blocking and defending and maybe over the line defending. And they think it's okay to do it in junior. And I think that's what we saw in that feature race. But technically there is no rule against what we saw in that junior race. You are obliged to do, it's allowed. And the only difference is between what we saw on the main event for X30 senior and for KA junior is Enzo was defending for the lead, not for 4th, right? He was doing what Harley did last year, which won on the race. And I'm going to say, like, we were some of the first guys to go out there. I don't want to say praise Harley, but that was in the height of, the Turney versus Norberg sort of dominance that season. And so Harley thought, I need to go out there and put it on my back, right? And go out there and win a race for Sodi at the time. So Enzo was trying to do the same thing this year. And there was respect shown. Whenever Enzo or Garzone led that pack, it was 1 move to the bottom of the racetrack and then force the other guy high. There was rarely ever 2 moves, if ever, that I saw. No one moved out of the way. Now, there was some bottleneck incidents. That's inevitable when you have 20 guys in the same, 2-second bracket, right? But for the lead, for the battle for 5th, battle for 10th, I rarely saw a driver get moved, and usually it was because somebody behind him hit him, and the guy behind that guy hit the driver in front of him or her, right? So I want to compare that to the senior race. I think the junior guys almost showed up the senior guys a little bit this weekend, especially that feature race. That was a cleaner race with a lot more drivers involved for the win. And usually, right, like you said, Caleb, when frustration comes into play, you start to race worse. It wasn't really the case for the juniors. And so I want to give my hats off to those guys. I think it was a little bit over the line, and we'll get into that in terms of how much white lining and for how long it happened. But in terms of the actual product on the racetrack, it was cleaner than most that we've seen from those drivers.
Yeah. Very good point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, 14 laps of white lining. I'm sure, like you mentioned, Enzo having the 1.6 second lead getting wiped away. I mean, naturally, there's got to be some level of frustration that kind of led to that level of white lining because Enzo's done that all year. Like I like to compare him to like a Brent Cruz or a John Burke level of controlling a race like we saw both of them do in junior, where it's like it almost gets frustrating to a sense, but they like controlling the race so much from the front. And when you block it, inevitably can explode the pack, especially when you know who you're racing against, when to block more heavily. And I think Enzo's done a really good job this year kind of controlling his white lining to be at points where he knows that it's highly likely that something's going to implode. The difference is with Garzón behind him, Garzón, I felt like did a really nice job of kind of sort of planning out his attacks, knowing when to kind of go high versus low and kind of keeping an eye on the gap behind him. And it was one of those things where the racing was pretty messy, but it was clean. And at the same time, it was also pretty high level at the front too, because Garzón figured out how to make the move around the outside of turn 1, figured out that there was an avenue into turn 2, as Chico also did as well. And ultimately, by the end of the race, you saw the development where guys went from being uncomfortable making those moves to now we saw passes for the lead with 3 or 4 to go around the outside of those corners. And to me, there's sort of a little bit of a beauty in the messiness of that race where the drivers in junior, yes, it wasn't the prettiest product, but they learned from that race, and you can say they put on a good show that was clean. And I know you mentioned there was a red flag, Caleb, and I think that it certainly wasn't ideal, but that red flag had nothing to do with the racing standards at the front of the field.
For sure.
A lot of the incidents happen further back, the bottleneck incidents. Yes, that's going to happen when you white line, but that to me wasn't the result of poor racecraft. It was a result of when you have a pack of 20 or 25 carts, there's going to be some level of attrition. And so I think it was as good as you're going to get from the racecraft standard. I personally do not want to see that racing consistently. And there needs to be discussion on how we can maybe kind of disincentivize white lining. I think we mentioned it a few podcast episodes ago, but the new tire compound and the amount of marbles it creates offline, to me, creates a lot of this issue where you have kind of nowhere to go if you're in the middle of the field. Unless you can figure out kind of where there's extra grip like they did in the junior race, there's really no kind of dissuasion from white lining and the risk of getting over under or the risk of getting driven around the outside. And last year at MCC we saw Turney make a move around the outside of turn 7 to take the lead against Keeble. We saw a variety of different crossover attempts, and Keeble ultimately won the race. He managed it, but this race in particular I felt like kind of highlighted that right now there's a little bit of a meta, so to speak, of being able to white line for a full race. And I think Keeble had that idea in the final for 4th, which is a whole different discussion, and bringing 12 carts essentially operating as a pace car for the field after the top 3. But when people are willing to play that game, when they have pushbacks, they know the consequences, and you're racing for a win, it becomes a viable strategy to white line that long. So to me, that's something that we kind of need to work out in the future. But the main point of this, it was an awesome job by the junior drivers to keep it clean. If you're going to have a race like that, it was nice to see that there weren't too many casualties, too many bad events. But Caleb, I know you have something you want to say here.
Yeah, I guess lastly, as cool as that junior race was, that's not going to fly in senior. We saw what happened to Jesus Vasquez in Wisconsin when he tried to do the same thing and stack up the field. Emery, you were in that race. Vasquez got shipped, shipped. Again, probably not, acceptable to ship somebody out of the way, but I get the frustration. And by no means am I telling you to go out and ship somebody, definitely not. But sadly, that's not going to fly in senior when these kids do move up. I know Enzo, is probably, it's strategy. I agree with it for 2 laps, but I think more than that, we're probably going a little bit, overboard. If so, that's kind of my thought on it. But yeah, overall, I like to wrap things up again. I don't want to signal out anybody. I don't want to point the finger at anybody. And by no means am I trying to bash somebody here tonight. And that's not the point of, I guess, talking things about this show. Our whole goal is to try to improve the sport, try to improve racecraft. And I want that to be absolutely clear for everybody watching this, right? Myself, Alex, and Emery do a very hard job, and we like our jobs. And by no means do we want to come on here and just bash people and, make them feel bad or whatnot and want to ruin opportunities. That's not the goal of us coming on here. The goal is to improve racing and improve the sport that we all love so much. And because we care about it. If we didn't care about it, we wouldn't be doing this. And we wouldn't come on here and talk about incidents that happen. But all of us care about the sport. We are in the sport. We race in the sport. And, we want to see respect from the guys that we look up to. I came in as a fan of this, and I looked up to guys like, Ryan Norberg, Austin Garrison, and others as well. Right. So we just want to see respect, and as we want that to go all the way down to the Microswift class. If they see that happen in X30, they're going to think it's all right to do it in Microswift. They're going to think it's all right to do it in junior. A club level kid who is probably a fan, if he sees that happen in a national race on Kart Chaser, he's going to go back to his club and swerve somebody. He's going to go back and white line for 20 laps, and we don't want to see that. We want to grow the sport across all levels. And that's why we do what we do. We don't come on here to bash anybody. And I want to make that absolutely clear.
100%. I second that. I know all three of us at some point, put names in our mouths tonight and we're like, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. We're not bashing anybody. We are just pretty much narrating what happened, right? That's all this was. And shining light on things that shouldn't be okay in racing. And so if you're a driver watching this and you kind of heard your name mentioned, this is not in a negative light. This is in a growing light. We want you guys to look at this and say, okay, well, I hear their side. I have my side, but I see where they're coming from, because and we're three guys. We've all been in the sport. I still drive. Emery drives. Caleb drives as well. We've been on all levels of racing, right? From the car side to the karting side to the grassroots side of things as well. And so we have enough experience, I think, to be able to say this. And so I know we talked a lot about, I think Keeble is the biggest one that we talked about. And if you're watching this, we love you. All right. You're a good friend of ours. And we mean this in the way that we want you to grow as a driver, because you have a strong future, a really big future in front of you. And so we just want you to know that, listen, we're not against you, because we talked about Garrison in the same way. Garrison is one of the best X30 drivers in the country. And he did a retaliation move on you, right? So it happens to the best of you. And we talked about Garrison in the same way they've talked about Harley. But this is all for drivers to understand, like, this is not okay if we want this sport to be taken seriously, to grow into this, level that we look at like Supercross, right? I mean, that's kind of what we emulate our stuff around. And it has the potential to go there, and it's going to get there. But it's going to get there quicker if, like Caleb said, with the Denny Hamlin stuff in NASCAR, right? Anytime you have an incident like this on the racetrack, you take a step back. And we never want to take a step back out of a weekend, whether it's a grassroots event or a national event, whatever it may be. You always want to keep looking forward, striving for more, improving the sport as a whole. And when the racing is not that good, and by good, I mean, dirty on the line of dirty, that's when it's not okay. And so, again, we mean this in the best way possible, because we love every driver out there. And again, we're all fans. That's why we work for Kart Chaser. That's why we are Kart Chaser, right? Like, that's why we continue to improve this. That's why we host the podcast. It's because we want the sport to grow. We see Xander's vision, and we're behind him every step of the way. And I know the drivers and the team owners are all behind it too, and the track owners and everybody that's involved in this sport. You guys are all behind this movement of trying to grow karting. And so, yeah, we just don't want to see bad racing. We want to see good racing. That's all.
And another thing to add, I mean, we're a big family. The karting community is a big family that fights and that, probably isn't happy with each other and, and whatnot. But we see each other every weekend, for goodness sakes, guys. We're on the racetrack like 50 weekends of the year, hanging out, spending time together. We go through rainstorms together, through, hurricanes sometimes, whatever it is. We're a big family. And when family fights, that's not what we want to see. We want to be together, because at the end of the day, we're all here for the same goal. We're all here doing the same profession every weekend. We go through the same thing, endless flights, countless driving hours, time on the racetrack and whatnot. we all do it. And we're a huge family because we have to see each other probably about like 5 more times this year, and we saw each other 20 times or 30 times earlier. Everything's blending together at this point, but we're a big family and we're all in it for the same thing. And I want that to be absolutely clear to anyone who's watching this or is going to go back and replay this as well. We're a big family and we're all in it for the same thing. And we can't have that be blinded by stuff that happens on the racetrack.
Yeah. And ultimately, I mean, look, it's a competitive sport. There's a lot of egos at play. There's a lot of really passionate people that are going through this. I mean, you look at pretty much anyone in the X30 field, anyone in the K field, anyone in general that puts a lot of money, whether it be through the teams or through the drivers, into these events. There's bound to be disagreements. What's acceptable to one person might not be acceptable to the other person. How they handle incidents might be different than one another. Our job as media is not to single out one driver, to single out one approach and be like, hey, this is wrong. But if we look at finals, if we look at incidents and we look at racing, it's in our best interest to grow the sport, to continue to try to find where we feel like the line should be and make that as clear as possible. Like, we're not karting Jesus. We're not going to be the answer to everything, but we're another opinion that should be taken into consideration. I think that the frustration that we've had with the racing quality from this weekend, it's not towards one driver, it's towards everyone. Like I mentioned, when I saw the penalty sheet from the X30 final, that was really bad to see. We don't want to look at a race afterwards and say, hey, the guy that finished 14th, well, actually, he finished 8th because there were 6 infringements in front of him. And, I think we can all work to be better and work to have higher quality races, because ultimately the product of kart racing is amazing as is. You've seen races like that KA Junior final. We've seen races in X30 this year that have been really high quality races. And there's very high quality drivers there. Harley Keeble has had a lot of good races over the last year and a half in the U.S. Austin Garrison, literally the last race he ran at USPKS Dalsman, as well as Scusa Newcastle, 2 really good displays from Garrison. One bad weekend, one bad final where maybe the emotions get the better of a driver doesn't define them. But, these are what we kind of come here to talk about. We're not here to create the drama. Ultimately, we're simply discussing what has happened on our streams, on our broadcasts, and on the track that we cover over the last weekend. And, I think ultimately, like, the goal going forward shouldn't be to have these sorts of discussions where we're talking in depth about driving standards issues and what constitutes blocking, what constitutes retaliation, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of really good racing that takes place every single weekend on a karting track, and I'm excited to continue covering it. I think tonight was an episode that, we kind of had to have in a sense because of everything that happened on Sunday and a lot of the comments that we've seen, a lot of stuff that quite frankly has been thrown in both directions, whether it be towards guys like Harley Keeble or other individuals in the X30 field, or from those guys towards the other field. I feel like this is kind of a coming together, a necessary discussion to have. And, ultimately the hope is that episodes, I know Caleb's going to get on me for saying episode, episodes like this are going to make it to where hopefully in future episodes, we can talk about just how great and how clean the racing is. So that's all I've got for tonight. On a lighter note, though, Caleb, this upcoming week, I know you said you're getting back into the college flow of things. You got anything more exciting going on?
Yeah, the DFW Triple Crown is actually going hot this weekend. Myself and Xander Clements will be on site. So if you care, that's something to look out for. I'll be there. Xander will be there. So yeah, that's what I'm up to this weekend. And the Kart Chaser finish line as well just got finished up in Colorado. So that's a cool thing to go see. That's definitely a bucket list item from now on.
And Alex, you're kind of in the same boat, getting set to go back to school. More work coming on in the future. What else is going on in your minds?
This weekend, Homestead Club race. I'll be there coaching from Friday to Sunday. Should be a good deal. And like you said, yeah, school starts. I'm online, luckily, so I don't have to actually attend the class. I just sit here on my laptop and do my work. So that'll be fun. Obviously, school's gonna be starting, so it's gonna be just an added thing on our plate, but we can handle it.
Yeah. Hey, you still need to play me in College Football 25 at some point.
I'm about to hop on. I'm about to hop on. So
I don't have my PS5 with me, unfortunately. So I should not have said that. But tomorrow night, though. Hey, for anyone out there watching, I believe next week we're going to hand the reins over to Big Red and Kyle Cuthbertson for episode, as they've got the Xander Clements podcast coming up next Wednesday. But on our ends, we got the KC Fantasy Football Draft coming up next Thursday. Just came up with our teams today. Alex, Caleb, I know you guys are in the league. I mean, how are you feeling coming into this one?
I am not going to pay attention to college football at all, or to football, sorry, at all. And I'm definitely going to finish last place. So that's all I got.
I'm winning. It's winning. I mean, I created the league.
Because you're a tryhard, pal. That's why.
I created the league, so I can make myself win if I have to.
Do we have any last place punishment suggestions? I want to hear this.
We should have a winning. We should have a prize. And we should have for sure a punishment. 100% a punishment.
Loser jumps into the pond at Newcastle. Bam.
Call it the James Overbeck simulator.
We won't know. We won't know for a while. We got to somebody that can in January we can have a punishment for Winter Series.
I think someone has to stay out at the chickens at that one Airbnb.
I don't know if we're going back there, to be honest. I don't think we're going back there. Those roosters are so annoying, dude. Oh my god.
Those roosters wake me up in the morning. But anyways, it's been a 2-hour podcast.
If you guys in the comments, actually, if you're watching this and you're in the comments, have a punishment idea for us for losing the KC Fantasy Football League, please put it in the comments.
Yes, most definitely. Give us suggestions. Hey, we might even cook up a live stream for the draft broadcast. No guarantees, but regardless, we'll be back in 2 weeks to preview IME Grands for that episode. That will be episode number 23. This one, a long episode, a good episode, lots of topics covered. You can find it on Spotify soon. You can watch it wherever you watch your podcasts. This has been episode number 22 of KC Grid Talk, powered by shopakr.com. My name's Emery Lida. Caleb Bieska, Alexander Stroll, as always. We were joined by Finn Bayliff earlier, and we will see you in a couple weeks' time.